Okay, when you're going to go set your SR up on the engine stand, you want to go ahead and put a washer on the block, just so you don't scratch or gouge your block out. These are the holes that we're going to be using to mount ours. Yours may differ. And as far as the bolt kit, you can get these from JDS Performance parts. The full kit comes with 4 bolts and 8 washers. You take your engine stand, and it's already loosened up. We'll go ahead and put it on the block. Try and get it lined up as best as possible. And also, what you're going to do is you're going to want to get your engine stand up as high as you can, so you don't get in the way of your main journals here. Because when you're going to go blueprint your block, the plate here is going to get in your way, and we might even need to cut that down. You're going to take a washer and a bolt on this side. Go ahead and just get it started in there. Once you got all your bolts in there, go ahead and straighten up your plate for your engine stand. Again, you want to get it up as high as you can, but you also want to get it in the center as much as possible. Then you want to go ahead and tighten up your bolts. And now you're ready to put it on the engine stand. Okay, what we have here is a S13 S14 black top. What we're going to cover in this video is a full teardown. This is going to be a 4-part series. Part 1 being the teardown, Part 2 being the motor build short block, Part 3 being the head build, Part 4 being the motor build long block, and potentially a Part 5 turbo upgrade. I got this motor as close to stock as possible with everything on it as if you were to buy it not new but from a JDM importer. It's missing a few hoses and clamps and things like that, but for the most part it's here. We're going to be very detail oriented about this. I'd also like to thank Team Clockwork for hooking up with some of the OEM parts that we did not have to make this back as stock as possible. So let's get on with the teardown. Okay, we're going to remove the fuel rail. First thing you can do is disconnect this hose right here. It goes to the valve cover. Just take the clamp and move it back. You can move it back or you can move it forward, either way. And just pull it off the line. If it gets stuck on the line, don't want to come off, you can use a pick tool such as this. After we have that off, you can either leave this hard line here on, or you can take it off. I'm going to take it off with it because it's a lot easier to do so. If you're going to leave this hard line on, you'll need to disconnect this rubber line either on this side or this side with one of these 2 clamps and pull it off. We're going to start off with this 10mm bolt here for this bracket. That pulls the bracket off and releases the hard line right here. Next, we're going to move these 2 10mm bolts here. It's a lot easier to go ahead and pull the fuel rail off the intake manifold before you take the intake manifold off of the motor, because the intake manifold will be sliding around all over the table or whatever trying to take all this off. So it's a lot easier to go ahead and do that now. And another reason we're going to go ahead and do it now is we're going to go ahead and send this rail with injectors installed in off the Deech Works to get their dynamic service and rail service done on it. I highly recommend using Deech Works. They're great at what they do, and they're my #1 pick when it comes to injectors. Next, you have 4 12mm bolts for the rail that hooks to the manifold. You have little plastic washers underneath each bolt between the fuel rail and the intake manifold. Make sure you don't drop those and lose those. And also you have rubber isolators underneath all 4 injectors, so you don't want to lose those either. And again, these are all 12mm. I like to loosen them up and leave the bolt in there so the plastic washer does not fall out. And of course, if you're doing this on the car, you'll need to disconnect your fuel lines here and here. Of course, you'd want to do a fuel pressure release before you did this. Now we're going to pull the bolts and the plastic washers out. This is what the plastic washer looks like. It sits in between the fuel rail and the intake manifold. You have 4 of these. You don't have to keep these in order. They're all the same. All the bolts are the same and all the plastic washers are the same. Okay, after you have your 2 10mm bolts here, your 10mm bolt here, and your 4 12mm bolts on the rail, and your plastic washer's all removed. All you gotta do is grab the fuel rail and pull it up out of the rubber isolators on the intake manifold. They might come with it. It's perfectly fine if they do. And they might stay on. And the full rail is off. I recommend taking the isolators off and putting them in a Ziploc baggie with all the bolts and nuts, just so you don't lose them when you go back and install everything. The rubber isolators that the injectors sit on, there's not a top or a bottom, but after they have been used, they create an indent there where the injector sits on it. So when you go to put it back in, I would put that pointing outward so the injector will sit on it again, just so you do not create a leak later. Okay, we're going to move the AC compressor. You have 4 14mm bolts holding on. You want to hold it while you're taking the last one off so it doesn't fall. To note, the top 2 bolts are longer and the bottom 2 bolts are shorter. Now we're going to move the AC bracket. You have 4 14mm bolts holding it on. And if you had any belts installed on your motor, you need to remove them. We don't have any on ours. All 3 of these bolts here were the same size, and this one here was shorter. And if you're going to remove your belt on your AC, you need to loosen this 14mm nut on the front, and then you'll need to turn your tensioner bolt, which is 14mm as well too, to loosen the tension on the belt, and then pull it off. Okay, now we're going to move the 10mm bolt for the dipstick. Okay, now we're going to remove the dipstick completely. Just take a set of pliers, and you want to grab onto the tube here and twist it back and forth while you're pulling up on it, but be extra careful because this is very soft metal. You can tear it up very easily. You don't want to scar it up either. You got to also watch out because it wants to hit the heat shield up here, so you kind of got to work it out. And it's out. This one here is actually bent compared to a stock one. The stock one will come out a lot easier, but this one's been bent before, so we're going to get a new one. Okay, now we're going to remove the AIV unit. You have 4 12mm bolts to remove it, and then you have this hose here connected down to the turbo elbow. If yours is cut like ours, you just take this clamp off and remove it. There's 2 long and 2 short. If you look on the back of the plate here, you have a spacer, and the 2 on the bottom there is for the longer ones, and then 2 on top is for the short ones. Next, we're going to move the stock catch can. You have a 12mm bolt here on this side, and you had 2 more here where the AIV was, but since they're already removed, you don't got to remove them again. You would normally have a hose with clamps running to the valve cover here. You'd have to remove that. You would also normally have a hose on the bottom here where it goes into the block. You'd have to remove that as well. But of course you have to remove that after you disconnect it. But since we don't have any hoses for the catch can on this motor, we're not going to be removing them. And it's off. Normally you would take it and you'd pull the hose off now when you remove it. Okay, now we're going to remove the turbo outlet pipe. There are 3 10mm bolts to remove it. Two on top are longer, 1 on the bottom is short. Be careful when you go to pull this off because there's a gasket behind it. You don't want it to fall off. You have a metal gasket. Okay, now we're going to disconnect this water line. You have a 12mm bolt holding it on right here. That disconnects that. Then you're going to remove this hose from the hard line here. You just have a clamp. Go ahead and move the clamp back. out of the way. And we'll go ahead and pull the hard line away from the rubber line. It might be a little tougher to get off from that because it might be stuck on there. If it is, you can use a hose remover such as this. We're going to go ahead and take this 12mm bolt and thread it back on there so we don't lose it or misplace it. Okay, now we're going to disconnect the turbo lines. You have a 19mm banjo bolt here. You can remove it. You want to watch out for your crush washers. They don't want to fall out. You should have one on each side, one on the block side of it and one on the bolt side. And you'll also never want to reuse these. And this banjo bolt here is a 17mm. And also, if you have not drained your water or oil out of your block yet, you would want to do it before you remove these turbo lines, or you're going to have oil and water everywhere. First thing you want to do is drain your oil and your water out of your block. Next, we have the turbo drain line here. You're going to want to disconnect it from either side. I'm going to take it off the block side so I can take it with the turbo. You have 8mm clamps or Phillips head screws. Then grab it and pull it off. Okay, now we're going to remove the turbo heat shield. You have 4 10mm bolts to remove. These usually break off because they get real brittle from being hot for so long. So you want to shoot them with WD-40 or PB Blaster or whatever you got. Let them sit for a while. Probably a good idea to go through the whole motor and shoot it all down with PB Blaster or WD-40. And let it all sit for a while to loosen some of the bolts up. They're all the same size. Go ahead and pull the heat shield off. Okay, now we're going to remove the turbo manifold. It has 8 nuts on it, and you want to remove it in sequence. Number 7 and number 8 you're going to have to get with a wrench because you can't get a socket on them. We'll go ahead and remove them all now. Number 1's already off because it's missing. Number 5 is a little tough to get to with a socket, so I'm going to use a ratcheting wrench. Okay, now we'll remove number 7. Now I'll remove number 8. Hold the manifold so it doesn't fall off when you remove this nut. And it looks like the stud's coming out with this nut as well, which you can run into that. And it did. It came off with the stud. Okay, now we're going to pull off the entire manifold with turbo and everything. Watch all your turbo hard lines everywhere. Make sure nothing's hitting anything anywhere. Now when you go to sit the turbo down with the manifold, sit it down just like that so you do not bend any of your hard lines. Go ahead and take off your exhaust manifold gasket. This is trash, you could never reuse this. Okay, now we're going to remove the exhaust side motor mount bracket. 4 14mm bolts. All 4 bolts were the same size. Before you take your power steering pump off, you would want to remove the belt. To do this, you would loosen up this 14mm bolt right there. You have a 12mm nut right here to loosen, and then you have a 12mm bolt here. That is your tensioner bolt that loosens up the belt to remove it. And then also here on the front you have a 14mm bolt to remove the bracket from the block, as well as 3 more on the side. We'll go ahead and remove this front one. You have 3 14mm bolts holding the power steering pump on. Also, you have a 14mm bolt here on the block. This is where you drain your coolant from your block. All 3 of these bolts were the same size, and the bolt on the front here was longer. Okay, now we're going to remove the water neck. There's 3 10mm bolts. You have another 10mm bolt on the bottom here. All 4 bolts were the same size. Okay, now we're going to remove all the water lines and brackets off the back of the head here, as well as the coil pack harness and coil pack harness bracket. Everything is 12mm bolt back here. We'll go ahead and take this one off that we put back on before from the turbo water line. Move this one here on the bottom. The one on the bottom here has a washer on it. The one where the turbo water line was does not. We're going to remove this top one here. It has the holder here for the coil pack harness. So we'll go ahead and open that up too. Also has your ground for your coil pack harness too. Go ahead and take the bracket off and the bolt. Next we'll take 2 12mm bolts off the coil pack harness bracket. Next we'll remove this 12mm bolt here for this hard line. Next you have a 12mm here, hold your ground wire that goes to your chassis. And that's off. Has a washer on it as well. All these bolts back here are pretty much the same size and everything. They're M8 1.0 thread pitch, and they're all about 15mm long. Okay, now we're going to remove the coil pack cover. It is 6 4mm cap screws, or Allen head, whatever you want to call them. Now we're going to unbolt all the coil packs. It is a 10mm bolt on each one. After you have them all unbolted, just grab the coil pack, pick it straight up. And again, pull it all out. Now we're going to unbolt the knock sensor, the 12mm bolt. We're just going to let the knock sensor hang there. We're going to remove the 2 12mm bolts here under the intake manifold. Okay, now we're going to remove this intake manifold bracket. You have 2 12mm bolts here and 1 14mm bolt here. These two are the exact same size. Now remove the 14mm bolt. Okay, now we're going to move the intake motor mount bracket. You have 4 14mm bolts to remove. You have 2 long bolts and 2 short bolts. The 2 long bolts go on this side and 2 short bolts go on this side. Okay, we're going to remove the 12mm bolt off this bracket here. You have another 12mm bolt here, but I'm going to leave that with the alternator bracket. Next I'm going to remove the 2 12mm bolts on the bottom of the alternator bracket, where it bolts into the oil pan, the upper oil pan. These 2 bolts are the same size. When you're going to take off your alternator belt, you have a 12mm nut here. You also have a 14mm nut on the other side, on the back side of this bolt here, that you have to loosen up. That actually lets the alternator move side to side. This loosens up your tensioner bolt so you can release the tension on your belt and move the alternator back. But you also need to do this to remove it so you can bring it down so you can take the bracket off. So we'll go ahead and loosen up the 12mm bolt. Of course we don't have a belt on here, so we don't got to worry about our tensioner yet. We'll go ahead and loosen the 14mm nut on the back side here, this bolt right here. And after you do that, you can move your alternator back and forth. And the reason it's stopping right here is there's a little clip on this tensioner bolt here. And as you can see, it's got a little clip right here on the bolt. We're going to have to get that off so that bolt can come out. I'm taking some new nose pliers and pressing down on it just like this. Be careful doing it like that. You don't want it to fall down into the alternator when it comes out. This is what it looks like. Okay, next we're going to remove this nut and washer completely. And you're also going to have to remove your tensioner bolt completely. And then pull this out the other side. It's your complete tensioner assembly so your alternator can come completely down. And put all this stuff back together so you don't lose any of it. Okay, now we're going to move the alternator and bracket all as one unit. You have three 12mm bolts, one here, here, and here. I'm going to remove this one first because it's going to pull this bracket off. Now you want to hold everything and take this last bolt off so it doesn't fall. And the full assembly comes out. The bolt on the right was longer and the two on the sides here were the exact same size. Of course this one was a little longer because you had the bracket. Okay, now we're going to move the 12mm bolt right here beside the throttle body. There's a bracket that runs all the way over to the head. Go ahead and take that 12mm bolt off. Okay, next we're going to move this hose that connects the intake manifold to the valve cover. Go ahead and pull the clamp back. And pull the hose off. Now we're going to move all the intake manifold bolts and nuts holding onto the head. Basically you're going to work your way outside in. The two on the outside have nuts and washers on them. They're all 12mm. The rest of them are bolts. We're going to start on this side as number 1. This one here's number 2. This one here's number 3. This one here's number 4. This one's number 5. The bracket here might get in your way, you might want to remove it. If you can't get the bolt off, it's a 10mm bolt holding it on. This one here's number 6. Number 7. Before we move the last bolt, I'm going to move this 10mm bolt off the valve cover that holds this wiring connection onto it. This is going to come off with the intake manifold. We'll go ahead and put the bolt back on the valve cover. Okay, now we're going to take the last one off. Before we're going to take the manifold off, we want to remove this hose right here because it's going to get in our way if we don't. We're going to need to remove this hose right here because it'll get in the way. Remove the manifold as well. Move the clamp back. We'll go ahead and pull the hose off of the hard line. We're going to disconnect this hose here as well, or it's going to get in the way. It's an 8mm clamp, and you're going to grab it and do your best to pull it off. The hose right there is a pain in the butt to get off. Okay, now we're going to disconnect this hose here. Go ahead and take the clamp and pull it down. And pull it off. You have another hose to remove right here, but it's a lot easier to take this off when you go ahead and pull the manifold off because you got a whole lot easier access to it and you can pull on it a whole lot easier. You have a 12mm bolt on this bracket right here. It runs all the way over to beside the throttle body. You need to loosen this bolt up. It's going to get in the way of pulling the manifold off because it's on the stud here. Just loosen that up and remove it completely when we take the manifold off. Okay, I've got a stool sitting here to set the manifold on to remove this hose when I get it off. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the manifold off. Again, it's going to hit this bracket in the front here. So watch out for that when you're pulling it off. Okay, now that it's off, you can see this hose right here. This is the one we need to remove. I'm trying to move the clamp back as much as possible. After you have the clamp back, just pull it off the hard line. And now the complete intake manifold is removed from the motor. Let's go ahead and set it aside. Okay, we're going to remove this bracket completely now. That's the one that was hooked to the manifold. 12mm bolt. Next, we're going to move the two 10mm bolts, holding this water neck onto the head. We're going to move these two 12mm bolts here that holds the thermostat housing on. After you have all that off, everything should come off completely. All the water lines completely should come off as one unit. Okay, now we're going to pull this hose here off. Go ahead and remove our intake manifold gasket. We're going to go ahead and remove this hose on the valve cover. Okay, now we're going to remove the oil filter bracket. It is 4 6mm Allen head cap screws. All 4 of those bolts were the same size. Okay, we're going to remove the valve cover now. There's a 10mm nut, a metal washer, and a rubber washer underneath it. You need to remove it in sequence, starting with number 1, number 2. I'm just going to remove all the nuts first, then I'll go back and take the washers off. Number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, number 10, number 11, number 12, and number 13. Now we'll go ahead and pull all the washers off. Now we'll go ahead and pull the valve cover off. The valve cover gasket might stay on, or it might come with the valve cover. Either way, it's alright. As you see, ours stayed on the valve cover. Okay, now we're going to move all 4 spark plugs. You use a 5/8 socket. We're going to go ahead and remove the chain guard too. 2 12mm bolts. As you can see here on our crank pulley, we're at top dead center with our pin on our front cover, but our marks on our cam gears are not on top, so we're going to have to rotate it a whole revolution using a 27mm bolt on the crank pulley. Go ahead and turn it over. turning it clockwise, not counterclockwise. We're going to stop it where the notch on the crank pulley from left to right, the second notch, lines up with the pin. As you can see there, we're lined up on the crank pulley. The second notch from left to right is lined up with the pin on the timing cover. That'll tell us we're at top dead center. Looking here at my cam gears, you can see the silver link on the chain does not line up with the dots on the cam gear. These are your dots on your cam gears right here. The exhaust cam gear is pointing in between 12 and 1 o'clock. The intake cam gear is in between 10 and 11 o'clock. That is at TDC, top dead center. You're supposed to have the silver links lined up with them on the chain, but the person I bought this motor from had it tore apart, so more than likely they did not install it properly. Another way to tell TDC is on your number 1 cam lobes for the exhaust and the intake, they're pointing outward. If they're pointing in, you need to rotate the motor 1 more revolution. As you see here on the cam angle sensor, you see the little notch on the barrel here. And if you look forward, there is a dot, the first dot you come to, and there's another dot to the right of it there. When you go to stab this in, the dot on the right there will be lined up with this notch on the barrel, just like this first dot is. Because when you go to push the cam angle sensor in, as you see this gear goes this way, it'll turn the gear with it. So it'll twist it that far to line it up. And as you turn the cam angle sensor, retarding or advancing, you can see that notch on the barrel turns where the dot stays the same. I'll go ahead and pull the cam angle sensor out so you can see what I'm talking about. As I go to pull it out, you'll see that dot on the right will line up with the notch on the barrel. Now the notch on the barrel might turn side to side as I'm pulling it out, but the dots on the gear itself will not until it actually starts coming out. That's when they'll start moving. Whoop, went a little too fast. But as you see there, the dot on the right, the front dot is lined up with the notch now. Even though I pulled it out a little too fast. You'll see it as it goes in. I'll go slower pushing it in because it's a little easier. This dot here on the left will line up with the notch on the barrel. You gotta take your time and make sure the gears are lined up with each other. As you see the dots lining up now. And now that it's inserted all the way, you can see the dots over too far, so we didn't install it properly. You gotta pull it back out. You gotta line that dot up with the notch on the barrel. And if you don't have the cam angle sensor turned properly when you're going to line up the gears, that's where it's going to throw it off. So we need to go to the left a little bit where it lines up now. And it should go in right now. Try and bump it in slowly so you can see it. See how that dot's lining up with the notch on the barrel now? And as we get all the way in, it's lined up perfectly. But again, if you were to turn the cam angle sensor to the right a little too far, one tooth, line up these gears here, then it would be off as we were just a minute ago. Another way to tell that your cam angle sensor is installed properly, as you see, my bolts are in the center of my slots for where I turn it left or right to advance or retard the timing. If you go to install your cam angle sensor and it's over here too far or over here too far, and in most cases you won't be able to get the bolt on because it's too far the other way, you'll know you're installed wrong. It's one tooth off and it will not start up that way. You have to make sure your dots are lined up with the notch on the barrel, and then after you get installed, your bolts are in the center of your slots. That is another way to tell your cam angle sensor is installed properly. Now that we're at TDC, we're going to go ahead and remove our cam angle sensor. Let's go ahead and remove the 12mm bolts. Mine were already loosened. When you go to pull it out, you just pull it straight out. There's an O-ring on it, which makes it not want to come out too easy. Just grab it and pull it outward. Yours are probably stuck a little more than mine. Mine's been pulled out before. And it comes straight out, just like so. And this is your O-ring. We're definitely going to replace that. Okay, now we're going to move our chain tensioner. It's two 10mm nuts. There's a small washer behind them. Just let it release and then pull it straight out. And also go ahead and remove your metal washer here too. Okay, now we're going to remove one of the cam gears so we can drop the chain. You need to use a 27mm wrench on the cam right in front of the first cam lobe, and then it's a 24mm bolt on the cam gear. Mine's already loose, so it'll come off easily, but if you have air tools or a breaker bar, it will definitely help out. It doesn't matter which one you take off. Make sure you don't drop your washer. We're going to go ahead and pull our cam gear off. You have to work it back and forth, and also the chain's going to be under a little tension too, so watch out for that. And just work the chain off the gear. And then pull your gear off. It's on this dowel pin and going through the slot here on the cam gear. It's not going to come off all the way because the gear is touching the side of the head here, but we'll get that off when we go to take the cam off. So you can just let it sit there just like that. Okay, now we're going to remove all of our cam caps. You need to do it in a 2 to 3 step process. We're going to do ours in a 2-step process. Starting with number 1. I'm going to remove it a 1/4 of a turn. Number 2. Number 3. You're basically working outside in. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, number 10. Okay, our second step, we're going to remove the bolt completely. Starting with number 1. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now we'll do the intake side, start with number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, and number 10. Our second step, we'll remove them completely. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now we're going to pull the exhaust cam out. You might have to turn it just a little bit. Get it out. Sometimes they're a lot harder to come out than that. Okay, now we're going to remove the intake. Go ahead and take the chain off the gear and just let the chain fall. Okay, now we're going to remove all the rocker arms. Best thing to do with these is put them in a Ziploc baggie and mark them E1, 2, 3, 4, I1, 2, 3, 4. Just keep them in order because you want to keep everything in order because everything wears a little differently. And when you go put it back together, it's going to help things to keep everything in order. All you do is grab and pick them straight up. Careful when you're picking them up that you don't pull your shims or your guides out and drop them. Okay, now we're going to move off the guides and the shims. I have a little small, it's a pill box basically what it is. And I just mark it E1, 2, 3, 4, I1, 2, 3, 4. And I keep the guide and the shim in each one. Just keep them in order. A magnetic one will help greatly. Pull it straight out. Drop it in. Also, if you can't find these boxes anywhere, you can buy them at JDS Performance parts. Okay, before you move your head bolts, you have 2 on the front here. They're both 10mm. Go ahead and take those out. These two in the front here are the exact same as the two long ones on your turbo outlet pipe. So if you ever need some extra ones, you can use them from there. After you get those two out, you have two more on the exhaust side. You have one 10mm bolt here to remove. And then you have another 10mm bolt here to remove. The one in the back is longer, and the one in the front is shorter. Okay, now we're going to remove our head bolts. We'll do it in a 2 or 3 step process. We're going to do ours in a 3-step process, removing it a quarter of a turn at a time. They are 10mm Allen head, and we're going to start with number 1. This being the front of the motor. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Number 7. Number 8. Number 9. And number 10. Starting over again with number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Number 7. Number 8. Number 9. And number 10. Now what we're going to do is remove them completely. Start at number 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 10. Now we're going to remove all the bolts and washers completely using a magnetic wand. If you're going to reuse these, keep them in order. Okay, if you're going to reuse your stock SR head bolts, the dimension cannot exceed 6.23 inch. So we'll go ahead and measure that now. That's from the bottom of the head to the tip of the thread. 6.23 inch. Touch the bottom of the head. And it's just a little shorter than 6.23 inch. It is actually, okay, 6.2040 is what I have on mine. So this is under 6.23 inch. We could actually reuse these head bolts if we wanted to, but we're going to go with the ARP head stud kit for our build. We'll go ahead and pick the head up first, and then we'll deal with the chain. Just work it off like that to the side, and then pull it up and off. You're going to sit your head down, make sure it's on a plastic table or a rubber mat. You don't want to scratch the surface of it. And also, when you go to pull it off, yours will probably be a little harder to get off. Mine has been taken off before. And there'll probably be a lot of coolant and oil everywhere too, so be sure you have drip pans below. Now we'll go ahead and take the head gasket off. Just take a gasket scraper or a 5-1 tool. Again, mine's been taken off before, so mine's going to come off really easily. You might have to work a little harder with yours, but you have a dowel here and a dowel here. That's where they're mainly going to stick at. And of course, unless you had a metal head gasket on here, you're not going to reuse the stock one. You can reuse the metal head gaskets, but you cannot reuse the stock ones. Got the guide here, just pull the chain up, and it'll come over. You'll be able to take the gasket off. You have a dowel here and a dowel here. You're going to remove those, take a needle nose pliers, and it has a cut on one side, so just squeeze it while wiggling it back and forth while moving up on it. And do the same on this one. And watch out for them to fall just like that. And now we're going to flip our motor over to take the oil pans off. You're probably going to pour a bunch of oil and coolant out of it when you go to flip it over. So be prepared for that. Mine's still dripping some. Okay, now we're going to move the lower pan. 10mm bolt, starting with number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. Number 6. Number 7. Number 8. Number 9. Number 9's missing on ours. And number 10. Let's go ahead and remove them completely. After you have all your bolts off, take a gasket scraper or a 5-1 tool and cut your RTV. Be really careful not to scratch or gouge the upper oil pan or the lower oil pan. If you have it all cut off, just pick it up. And now we're going to move the baffle, which is also known as a windage tray. You have 7 10mm bolts. Go ahead and pick it up. Now we're going to remove the upper oil pan. You have the 2 nuts on the rear here to remove. The one on the right is number 1, the one on the left is number 2. Then you have number 3, which is right here. These are all 12mm bolts, except for the 2 nuts on the back are 10mm. Number 4. You got number 5. Number 6. Number 7 is over here on the side, you can't see it. You'll need to use a smaller ratchet and socket to get this one off. Number 8. Number 9. Number 10. Number 11 is here on the side too, you can't see it. You'll need the smaller ratchet and socket to get that one too. Number 12. Number 13. Number 14. 15. 16. 17. And 18. As far as the factory service manual states, you're supposed to take a transmission to motor bell housing bolt, stick it in this hole here, and in this hole here too. And that's supposed to pry the pan up to break loose the RTV. This one here will bottom out. You can't do it unless you have a threaded bolt that's threaded all the way up, where the transmission bolt, they don't. They just thread halfway. So we'll work on this side, but on this side here, we'll just use a pry bar because you have the cutout here, so you can just pry up on there to get it out. We'll go ahead and do this side here first. Let's go ahead and thread it in. We'll go ahead and tighten it down. Let's go real slow with it. It's just picking the whole pan up, so it's doing breaking the RTV loose. Now we'll go ahead and pry on this side here. Just be real slow and real gentle with it too. You don't want to break anything, tear anything up. Go ahead and take this bolt back out. Now we'll go ahead and pull the pan off. Watch out for your strainer here. Don't hit it or tear it up. Watch out that you don't drop it back down on the dowels. You have a dowel pin here and a dowel pin here. And you also have the 2 studs back here. So you got to pull it straight up and off. As you can see, this is the front and this is the back. Right here, when you get to the last 2 here, they're longer, and then you have 4 longer ones on this side. And then you have the 2 real long ones, and then the back side there, you got the 2 nuts and the washers. But here on the front side, the first 4 here is shorter, and the 2 here on this side is shorter, and the 2 on the front short. Okay, now we're going to remove our oil strainer. There's a 10mm bolt here. Remove it. And you have 2 12mm bolts here. Okay, now we're going to remove this baffle. 5 10mm bolts. Okay, now we're going to move all our main bolts. They are 17mm, and we're going to move them in a 3-step process, starting with number 1. These are pretty tight. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. 5. Number 6. Number 7. Number 8. Number 9. And number 10. Now starting back with number 1, we'll do another quarter turn. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now we're going to go to move them completely. Starting with number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now we'll go to move them completely and out. If you're going to reuse these, keep them in order. Go ahead and grab your bearing beam and pick it up. Okay, now you have the bearing beam off. It's a whole lot easier to get the rear main seal plate off now because you have access to the inside here to tap it and hit it with a hammer and knock it off. But you have 4 10mm bolts holding the plate on. Okay, now we have the bolts off the rear main seal plate. I'm going to take a hammer, the butt of it, and put it on the studs there. Take another hammer and I'm going to tap on it and break the rear main seal plate loose, the RTV. You want to go real slow with it, you don't want to damage it. You don't want to bend your studs either. Should be able to pull it off now. You gotta work it off because there's a dowel pin there and a dowel pin there, and then your rear main seal plate is off. Okay, now we're gonna move our main caps. The threaded hole on the main cap in the center is a M8 by 1.25 thread pitch, which all I did is I took a piece of metal and bent on both sides. I got an M8 by 1.25 thread pitch bolt with a washer on it, and I've just got it screwed onto my slide hammer. That's how I'm going to pull mine out. Just got to thread it in there. Just get it threaded in there enough to be able to pull it out. Just tap it out. And it's off. And also if they start getting stuck, you can take it with your main bolts and put it in the hole and just go backwards and forwards with it a little bit just to free it up if it's stuck in there. Also, while you're taking your main caps off, make sure you leave your bearings on there, or if they come off, make sure you keep them in order because we're going to need them for blueprinting. After you have your main caps off, you get to see your crankshaft main journals, see if they're scoring or scratched at all in any way. These look like they're in really good shape, but then if you look at the bearings, these are the main caps with the bearings still installed. You'll see how we have uneven bearing wear. I mean, they're not scratched on, there's no spun bearings, it just has pretty bad wear on them. You know, that could happen from bad oil or trash in the oil, or, you know, things being out of balance, but that's what we'll go over in the blueprinting. Okay, since we're at TDC, top dead center, number 2 and number 3 rods are at the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and take those 2 off first. The nuts are 14 millimeter. Go ahead and loosen both rod caps up. I like to just break them loose. And then we'll go ahead and remove them. There's no washer, it's just a nut. And if you're going to reuse these, you need to keep them all in order. And also when you go take the caps off and the rods off, if the bearings fall out, make sure you keep them in order because we're going to use them for blueprinting. Okay, now we have the rod nuts off. We're going to take a rubber end of the hammer and we'll tap down on the rod bolts just to push it down so we can loosen up the rod cap to take it off. Don't worry, your piston's not going to fall out the bottom because you got rings on there holding it on. Sometimes they get stuck like this one kind of is. This one went easily. This one's a little bit stuck. You just want to tap it on both sides a little bit at a time until it comes out. Well, until the piston goes down. Grab your cap and pull it straight up. And as you see, my bearing stayed on. I'm just going to take a magnetic one and pick it up. It's just the oil holding it on. And I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it back in the rod cap just to keep it in order. And again, you want to keep your rod caps in order, like whichever way it came off, that's the way you want to position it back on there if you're going to reuse these. And also keep them in order for when we go to blueprint. This bearing stayed on too. It's very common for the rod bearing to stay on. If you have to have the caps off, they have these rod bolt protectors you put on there. You need to put them on the bolts. What these do is they help keep the journal from getting scratched by the rod bolt as you're going to push it out of the bore. And after you have that on, you can go ahead and push it down by hand. You're going to get to some point where you're not going to be able to push it by hand anymore. And what you're going to do is take the end of the hammer, put the butt of the hammer on the inside of the rod where the bearing is. Of course, the bearing could have stuck to the crankshaft too, and if it did, you need to go ahead and get it out before it falls. But this one stayed on. We're going to put it on there, and we're going to go below with our other hand to catch the piston and rod as it comes out the bottom, or top, however you want to look at it. Just tap it down lightly. Don't want to damage anything or scar anything up. And your rod and piston combo is out. Okay, now we're going to do the same to number 3. Put your protectors on. And then push it down by hand. If you can't push it down by hand, then you could take the rubber end of the hammer and tap it down on the rod bolts. Okay, now we're down too far to hit it with the hammer. I'm going to use the rubber end of the handle for the engine stand. We're on the edge of the rod. And just tap it down. Now when you're going down on this side, you want to be careful of your oil squirters. You don't want to bend or tear them up. Go ahead and tap it all the way down. And your piston and rod combo's out. Okay, now we're going to turn the crankshaft over to get number 1 and number 4 on the bottom. 27mm on the crank pulley bolt. You want to go slow with it because your main bearing caps are off. You don't want to pull the crankshaft up. Okay, now we're going to remove the rod nuts. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and knock this one down. Number 1. Take the cap off. Remove our bearing. Put our protectors on. If you wanted to, you could leave the bearing on there to help protect the journal as well. And also watch out when you're pushing things down by hand like this, because there's a lot of sharp edges in here. You don't want to cut yourself. And knock the piston rod out. Okay, now we'll do number 4. Our protectors on. Push it down. Okay, I have the engine flipped over on the side so you can see the piston coming out. And it's out. Of course, I should have caught it there. I almost dropped it, but that show you there. To be careful with it when you're knocking it out. The reason I left the front timing cover on rather than taking it off beforehand, because you can take it off beforehand, and I do recommend it. But the reason I left it on is I wanted to show you the stoppers here for the timing chain. You have one right here and one right here. They actually keep the chain from jumping a tooth on the bottom here. So if you were to ever, remove your chain on top and you're worried about it jumping a tooth on below for letting it drop when you go to, do a cam swap or something, you don't have to worry about it because these 2 stoppers are here, as long as they're not broken off. So as long as they're on there, you don't have to worry about your timing chain jumping a tooth on the bottom on the crankshaft. Okay, now we're going to remove the crank pulley. It's a 27mm bolt. Mine's already loose. If yours is not, you'll need to use an impact on it because it's torqued to around 112 foot-pounds. Go ahead and loosen the bolt, but do not remove it because we'll need it to pull the pulley off. What I do is just go ahead until it comes off and then thread it in a couple more turns. You got to put your puller on. Do not put it on the front one because it will break. It's real thin. You want to put it on your second one here. You normally would have to use the wrench to pull it off. Mine's been put on and took off before, so it's coming off by hand. Then you just pull it off. If your keyway's still in your crankshaft, leave it on there. If it's coming off, then take it off. You don't want to lose it. We'll go ahead and remove the pulley off the water pump if you haven't already. It's 4 10mm nuts. Pull it off. Now we're going to remove the water pump. It's 6 12mm bolts. They're all the same size. After you get them all off, take a rubber mallet and tap on the wheel here and break the RTV loose. And it comes right off. Okay, now we're going to remove the front timing cover. It's 10 10mm bolts. all those bolts are the same size. Okay, now we're going to take a rubber mallet and tap it off. You have a dowel pin here and a dowel pin here to pull it off. And you also have the RTV to break loose. Just hit it real lightly and slow. Don't want to tear anything up. And your timing cover's off. This is your oil pump assembly right here. After you take your front cover off, make sure you remove this O-ring here. Just take a small flathead screwdriver and pull it out. Okay, now we're going to remove the right hand timing chain guide. This is actually a revised part. They have a new one now that's got metal in it so it doesn't break. But it's 6mm Allen head bolts. Go ahead and loosen the left one up too. Both these bolts are the same size. This is just a completely plastic piece, and that's why they revised it, because they break off. We got to remove the left hand one. It is 6mm as well. And this bolt here is a little longer than these two here. We'll go ahead and pull the timing chain off too. Anytime you store a crankshaft, you want to store it standing straight up so nothing gets clogged up in the oil galleries inside there. You just want to grab it on both ends and pick it straight up. Might help to turn it just a little bit to break the oil loose. Just take your time, go real slow so you don't scratch anything. And you got to watch out for your thrust washers to fall out like that. It's okay. And be careful if you grab the end here with the drive spacer and the gear, because they could slide off as well. Stand it straight up just like this. Then you have your thrust washers. You have two sides. This side here has a slot here and here, and the other side is smooth. The smooth side goes against the block just like that. Then you have another on the other side. This is your number 3 main journal that has your thrust washers. Okay, now we're going to move all the bearings. We're going to keep them in order for blueprinting. Just want to push them to the side and pull up on them. Okay, now we're going to remove all 4 oil squirters. They are 10mm 12-point bolts. They're actually banjo bolts. Once you get the bolt off, just pull it straight up. Just like that. You have a banjo bolt, and then you have your oil squirter. Okay, now we're going to remove this baffle. 2 10mm bolts. That's what it looks like. Both those bolts are the same size. When you're going to store your pistons and rods, always take the cap and put it back on with the nuts. As you'll notice here on the rods, this one here has a stamp 4 and 4. This is number 4 rod and piston. And you flip over on the other side, there's a 0 on top, nothing on the bottom. And also another way to tell, you can see on the inside here, the tang for the bearings there. And then on this side, it's over here too, because it's on the same side. Whereas on this side, it doesn't have a tang on neither side. That's another way you know you got the cap right on the rod. If you look here on this one, you'll see it has 3 stamped on it. See, it has 3 stamped on top and bottom. And on the other side, there's a 0 on top and nothing on the bottom. Where this one has a 2 and this one has a 1. When you're going to blueprint your rods, if you're using your stock ones, just wipe all the oil off everything and then tighten the caps back down on the rods so you can check the ID of everything with a bore gauge. If you're going to use aftermarket rods, you need to take all the bearings out, wipe them off, and install them into the aftermarket rods and tighten all the caps down so we can check the oil clearance on it. Okay, for your bearings, these are my main bearings, the block half. I've wiped all the oil off and numbered them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 because that's the number generally we're in. These are my thrust washers. I marked this one F for front, this one R for rear. As far as the thrust washers go, if you were wanting to reuse your old one, you would want to check the crankshaft end play before you take the crankshaft out to see if you need to replace these. But I always replace them with new ones anyways, just for added insurance, and then I check the end play after I have them installed. But if you want to reuse your old ones, you need to check your end play before you take the crankshaft off. Okay, I'm going to show you how to remove the stock rod off the stock piston. You have a snap ring inside here. You're going to need some snap ring pliers, just like this, have teeth on the end, and they'll squeeze it together. And that's all you got to do is stick it in the holes. Squeeze it together, and then pull it out. After that's out, you got to get the piston pin out. You only have to remove the snap ring on one side. You don't have to do both sides. Pressed in, so we're going to have to knock it out. What I'm going to use is I have an air chisel for my air hammer. Since you have to lock it in this way, I'm not going to lock it in, so be extra careful doing it this way. And also in this instance, I'm going to take my clip off this side as well. Now I'm just going to insert it in there and take my air hammer. Again, be very careful doing this because it's not locked in. As you can see, it's coming out the other side. And after it gets to this point, it won't go any further. So what we're going to do now is we're going to use the other side of the chisel, and we're going to stick it onto the pin like so, and take our air hammer and press on it like that. Again, be extra careful doing this because your chisel is not locked in your air hammer, and you don't want to tear anything up. Be very slow with it, make sure everything's coming out good. And make sure you're not scarring up the inside of the piston or the piston pin. And when you get where the pin's going to come out, turn it down this way so it will not shoot out the side. You'll get to some point where your rod will come loose. And again, pour your chisel back out. Take the rod out, and then we'll put it back in and continue taking the pin out. You don't have to take this out all the way if you don't want to. If you want to, then you just get and press it all the way out, which I'm not. I'm going to leave mine in. And that's how you take a rod off of the piston.